Tabitha Scoble. I'm the director here at Cortland County Historical Society, and if you haven't been here before, we do have a few things on this back desk on your way out. We have our quarterly newsletter, we have membership forms, and we have the schedule for the next couple of lunch and learn programs. So if you'd like to pick those up on your way out, you can. There's also a log book right inside the door here of this room that most of you didn't sign. We do keep track of who comes to visit, how many people we get visiting. So if you could please sign that on the way out, that would be great. Also, we have refreshments in the back. If you'd like those, please take those on your way out if you didn't get any on the way in. And, oh yes, two things. Cell phones. If you have your cell phones on you, please set them to silent so that they don't go off during the program. And we do have a new book coming out. So there are some postcards. Liz has them. She's put those on the desk as well. And it covers 60 years of Cortland County history. And it's been 3 years in the making, thousands of pictures that they had to choose from. It is a phenomenal book. So you may want to pre-order that. And we do have a sign-up sheet for that on that desk right back there as well. So I think I covered everything. Oh, except exits, because there are so many of you. The door you came in is the door you could go out, but there's also an exit down this hallway and outside if there is an emergency of any kind. Also, I have to put my glasses on to introduce Sue. This is Sue Greenhagen. She's a retired librarian at SUNY Morrisville. She's the historian for the village of Morrisville and town of Eaton. And she's a member of the Historic Oakwood Cemetery Preservation Association, Morrisville Historic Preservation Association. Okay. Onondaga County Civil War Roundtable. And she told me she'd tell me what else she did, but she didn't have spare time, so she's just busy. So we're really glad to get Sue here to talk about the Loomis Gang. I think probably a lot of you are related somehow. It seems like those were most of the phone calls.
I found out one right there.
Oh, there she is. That explains a lot, right? Okay, so anyway, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, when I talk about history, I find that people relate to it much better if they talk to somebody who lived at that time. Person I'm going to portray is named William F. Bonney, the sheriff of Madison County from 1861 to 1865. He knew the Loomises, and he's the one to tell the story. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. The Loomis Gang. You want to know about the Loomis Gang? Well, let me tell you. Let me first introduce you to the gang. Let's see if I can get this thing to work here. We'll see if it will work. I might have to have someone help me with it, but we'll see. First member of the gang is George Washington Loomis, Jr. Now, as it says on his picture, they called him Wash. Handsome young fella, studied law, never took the bar, but he knew enough legal jargon to keep the family out of jail. Daughter Cornelia, member of the gang. Well, they said she could ride with the boys, and probably better than the boys. But you notice that she's dressed quite nicely. Look at her hair is braided, she's wearing a nice dress, ruffles on the sleeves. You have to remember that this gang was not a group of ruffians like out west, cowboys. This family was educated, aristocratic, and very crooked. Keep going here. Grove Lawrence went by Grove. He was the horseman of the family. He knew good horse flesh when he saw it, and that came in really handy for them. Theodore Wheeler went by the name Wheeler. He spent most of his life up in Canada because there were warrants for his arrest down here in Madison County. By the way, that's his family up in Canada. He had 10 children. Now that's him right there, and that's his wife Adelaide, and you can see why she looks so tired after those 10 children. Down there they have a dog named Bandit. Amos Plum, one of the boys, he went by the name Plum Loomis, but look how he's dressed. almost as nicely as I am. Top hat, nice coat, vest. Hiram Denio was the youngest of the boys, and well, it was said that he wasn't quite right. But the mother of this family, Rhoda Loomis, the matriarch, the lady who taught these children how to steal when they were little, she would tell them they were going out in the village or out and about. She'd tell them, "Don't you come back unless you've stolen something. It might be a jackknife or a chicken or who knows what. Don't come back unless you've stolen something." So the gang basically is this group right here with Rhoda in the middle, Mother Rhoda. Oh, there was one other brother. His name was Bill, and he lived up in Durhamville right on the Erie Canal. Now, how handy was that? He was on the Erie Canal. The family would steal something, send it up to Bill, put it on a packet boat, and off it'd go to Albany or Rochester, wherever. So that was real handy for the family. Now, you remember the Pilgrims came in 1620 to Plymouth Rock. Well, it wasn't long after that the Loomises came to America in 1638. First Loomises arrived in America. And they built a house, this homestead. This part right here, the salt box, is the original building that they lived in, and that's still standing. In fact, there's the salt box of this house, and it's on the campus of a school, the Loomis Chaffee School in Connecticut. The Loomises founded the school, and it merged with the Chaffee School, which was a girls' school. But I'm telling you, the Loomises, the whole family, except this one line, they were very aristocratic. They were the pillars of society. They were educators and lawyers and teachers and doctors and scientists. They were all very well educated. Now, the first Loomises to come to America, Joseph Loomis and his wife, Mary White. Joseph and Mary, that's an easy combination. And they had, let's see how many, 8 children. Now, you see the numbers with these names. That's what the genealogists do to keep the names straight. So we're going to talk about Deacon John, follow his line. And you know, he's buried over in Windsor, Connecticut. In fact, there's his headstone. That's the oldest Loomis headstone still surviving in America. And it says, Deacon John Loomis, age 66 years, died something of September in 1688, I believe it is. That's pretty darn old. That's even older than me. All right, so Deacon John, now we followed his line going down. He had a son, Sergeant Daniel. He had a son named Daniel. He had a son named Daniel. He had a son named Daniel. It gets a little monotonous, but so we're down to Lieutenant Daniel, who served in the American Revolution. He married a Sarah Crawford, and their first son was George Washington Loomis Sr. He's the gentleman that married a lady named Rhoda Millette from Waterville, and they were the parents of the gang. And you can see his dates. Now, he's called George Washington Loomis because he was born in 1779, and he was named after our first president, George Washington. So they came to Connecticut, and when his parents died, George Washington Loomis had to go up to Vermont to stay with an older sister. And it got to be up there, it was around, I don't know, 1800 or so. He had to get out of Vermont, one step ahead of the sheriff, because George was acquiring horses that didn't belong to him. So he headed for central New York and wound up just south of Utica at a place called Sangerfield. Now, one of his sisters lived in this house right on that corner, and he stayed with her for a while. And by the way, this Sangerfield, there used to be an inn Sangerfield Inn was right there. And way back, now let's see, in the mid-1990s, a fella wrote a book on the Loomises, Frontier Justice. Young fella wrote this very good book. And he went on a speaking tour in the area. And one night he spoke at the Sangerfield Inn. And by the way, the Loomises are buried across the street in the Sangerfield Cemetery. And wouldn't you know, that night the Sangerfield Inn burned to the ground. Ooh, we just don't know about that. Well, anyway, Sangerfield. And Sangerfield, on this map over here, we got that Cherry Valley Turnpike. I don't know what you call it, Route 20. Yeah, and it goes to Madison, Bowville. And I put a star over there because that's where I live. So here's Sangerfield, but George was looking for a place to build a home and raise a family. So he went down Mason Road. He found some nice property, and he built a very nice house. You can see it's got a fence. It has a summer kitchen in the back, 2 stories, barns on the other side of the street. And you know, if you go over there today, you find nothing. But I'll tell you what happened to it a little bit later on. Now, across the street there were barns. Let's see if I can get this. Yeah, so there's one of the barns, and again, if you go over there today, you might find the foundation of that barn, and you're looking out over a place called 9 Mile Swamp, which was where the Loomises, they knew that swamp like the back of their hand. They could hide horses, they could hide anything in there, and I'm telling you, as many times as I went after them, I could never find them in that swamp. It was like magic, they would disappear. Get up on the hill, and you look down on the swamp. That road, by the way, is a newer road, and it's called Loomis Road, and that's 9 Mile Swamp. But you can see how far you can see from where the house was built, and that was very handy. I'm going to take my hat off, getting a little warm. So up on that hill, you could see it in any direction for miles and miles, which was very useful for them. All right, let's talk about the crimes of the Loomises. Well, stealing. Remember I told you right from the time they were kids, they were stealing things. And mostly they were known for stealing horses. Well, we'll talk about that. Counterfeit money. Now, they didn't print it, but they sure passed it around. Case of murder we're going to talk about. Arson, that was one of their favorite escapades, was arson in the neighborhood. And just general corruption. General corruption. Well, anyway, let me tell you about the horses. You know, at the time I was sheriff, it was the American Civil War was in full tilt, and the Union Army needed horses. The record said something like 700,000 horses were used by the Union Army. Somebody had to supply them with these horses, and the Loomises thought this was a really good idea. They could get $160 for a horse or $170 for a draft horse. So if they stole a string of horses, maybe 10 horses, sent them up to Bill, put them on the packet boat, sent them to Albany, they could make a nice bundle of money off those horses, and it didn't cost them a penny. Now, I'll tell you one of the tricks they used. Like, you know, you think if you, like, your horse is probably tied outside, right? You know, and you know what it looks like. Okay, so if this is your horse, now the Loomises would take that horse, they'd grab it right off the hitching post, and they would take a hot baked potato, cut in half, and they would put it on that horse's forehead, and all of a sudden it's bleached. The horse now has a blaze. You're not even going to recognize your horse. And they pulled this time and time again. Sometimes they used stove black to make a white or gray horse dark, or they'd use whitewash to give a horse socks. And they knew all the tricks. They knew them all. And you know, the people got pretty kind of sick and tired of that. And even down in Sherburne, there it is, Sherburne Horse Thief Detective Society. Well, they were going to organize and they were going to do something about these Loomises stealing their horses. And by the way, that fellow's name is George Walter, who wrote the original books on the Loomises. Anyway, this Sherburne Horse Thief Detective Society, they scheduled a meeting. And sure enough, the time came, and the town folks came, and they came to the meeting, and they're going to do something. Well, the doors came open, and who walked in but 3 of the Loomis boys. Walked right in, put their 25 cents down on the table, and joined the society. That was the end of the society. Well, some of the things they did. Now, that's the Columbus Hotel down in Shenango County, Columbus Hotel. And in the back, later on, they built a dance hall. Okay, it was a very, very, very ornate dance hall. In the back, one end they have Union Forever, a hand-painted mural. At the other end, there's a painting that says Blackman Hall. Well, folks used to go to dances on Friday and Saturday night, and Rhoda liked to go to the dances, but she would leave a little bit early, would go in the cloakroom, and she would look at all the muffs hanging on the wall. Oh, and there were some lovely ones. In fact, I'm going to show you one. I think she stole this one, but we got it back. I'm going to send this around, and feel how soft that is. She would pick out the best muffs, and she would slide them up her leg. And then she'd grab another one, 2 on each leg, and with her big skirt, nobody knew. They didn't know, and she would just waltz out of there. Well, she finally got caught in the act, and that put an end to that little escapade. But there was a lot of resale value in those muffs. That's probably sheared beaver. Get a good price for that. All right, let me tell you about the counterfeit money. Now, back in my day, we didn't have these dollar bills like you folks have. Every dollar bill looks the same. Back in my day, it was all different. They were from different banks. Here's Salina, here's Bank of Syracuse, Salt Springs Bank. Banks printed their own money. So over in Albany, they would print out money that looked like this, and they'd send it over. The Loomises would go and buy that counterfeit money, bring it to central New York, and they'd start spending it. And who knew that it was counterfeit? Yeah, I never saw a bill from Salt Springs Bank. If they handed me one, I'd say, okay, that's one. So it was very lucrative to spend a little money to get a lot of money back. All right, here it is, the murder case. Henry and Phoebe Crandall, a wonderful couple. They were just the sweetest couple. Henry was a big fella. He was about 6'4" and broad-shouldered, strong as an ox. Phoebe was about 5'2" and just a frail little lady. They lived out in Leonardsville. That's a picture of their house out there in Leonardsville.
Yes,
And, well, that house is sort of there today. This house is built on the footprint of the old house that once burned. So let me tell you what happened. Phoebe Crandall was murdered. Now, it happened in 1865 in December. She was cooking supper. It was about 5 o'clock. And 3 men came to the door. And they barged in. You know, folks didn't lock their doors. Henry was out in the barn doing barn chores. So these men barged in. Now, they knew that Henry didn't believe in banks, that he had money hidden in his house, probably under his mattress, and they wanted the money. And they said to Phoebe, "We want the money." Well, poor little Phoebe, she went to the cookie jar and got out some coins that she had, and she gave them to them. And they said, "We want the money." Well, by this time, Henry came in the back door, and there he is, coming in the kitchen, and he sees these men terrorizing poor little Phoebe, and a melee broke out, and Henry didn't know it, but one of those men had a gun. And in the melee, the gun went off, and Phoebe was shot, and Phoebe was killed. Now, Henry kept fighting, and then he saw what happened to Phoebe. He said, "Okay, I'll go get the money." He went into his bedroom. He didn't get the money. He brought out a 2x4 he called his headache stick, and he started swinging, and they kept fighting, and the gun went off again, and Henry was shot. He was wounded in the face, just below his eye. Well, the men realized that they weren't going to get the money, So they hightailed it out of there, and Henry, wounded and bleeding, crawled to his brother's house. Crawled there, and he gets there, and he knocks on the door. His brother answered the door, didn't even recognize him because he was so bloody and beaten. Well, nobody ever served any time in jail for the murder of Phoebe Crandall. Oh, about 15 years later, we had a trial, and a fellow named Isaiah Belfield was arraigned and indicted and put on trial. But by that time, poor Henry, with that wound, he couldn't see out of that eye, and he was blind in the other eye. So he couldn't identify Mr. Belfield, and he was acquitted. Now, this was big news. This was really big news. It was even in the New York Times. Aged couple murdered in Coontown, Otsego County. Now, they didn't get all the facts straight, but that didn't stop them. I'll bet it was even in that Cortland newspaper. What was it, the Standard? I'll bet they covered it as well. I hope they got the facts right. It was Phoebe that was killed, Henry was wounded, and it was Madison County, not Otsego County. Well, anyway, arson. Yes, they were guilty of arson, and I'll tell you, if you were a friend of the Loomises, well, you know, you were on their good side, and they would pretty much leave you alone and maybe even help you if you needed it. But if you threatened to, go to the sheriff, or, you know, turn them in or provide evidence, the next morning you might find one of your outbuildings or barns burned to the ground. And I'll tell you, one of the most audacious acts of arson ever committed took place right in the village of Morrisville. Now, back in the 1840s in Morrisville, we were the county seat back then, and there's the county courthouse and the clerk's office, and that was about in the 1840s. And folks in Madison County said, well, you know, we need a new courthouse. In 1849, they built a nice, beautiful new courthouse. Well, it lasted about 15 years, and the courthouse was burned, that new courthouse, the 1849 courthouse. I was a sheriff. I was next door to the courthouse was the jail and the sheriff's residence. I was right there. And all of a sudden, 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear shouts of fire, fire, up and down Main Street in Morrisville. And people are starting to come running towards the courthouse. I looked out the window, and there the courthouse has flames coming out of the windows, coming out of the cupola. Well, people started coming and running, and they were bringing their buckets with them, you know, and they were going to form a bucket brigade. Now, luckily, out in front of the courthouse, we had a large fountain about 30 feet across, and it was put there for fire protection. Well, the folks came and they got their buckets going, they got a line going, they'd fill the buckets, pass it along, toss it on the fire, toss the bucket back, and it would go around and around. Well, that Morrisville Fire Department still has one of those buckets. That may have been used to save the courthouse. Well, anyway, now right across the street from the courthouse was this little building called the engine house. And that's where the firemen's headquarters were. That's where their apparatus and hoses and all that stuff was. And even today, that building is still there. Now, everything, the firemen finally, volunteer fire company, finally arrived, and they pulled our pumper out of the engine house. And they pulled it by hand. I mean, there's no horses with this, and it goes across the street. And again, the Morrisville Fire Department still has that pumper. It's in excellent condition. So they pull us out, they pull the pumper out, and they bring it over to the fountain, and they put one end of the hoses into the fountain, and the fellas grab the other end of the hose, and the guys in the middle, they get ready, and then they get the order to do the brakes up and down, and draw that water out of the fountain, and shoot it out of the end, and it's going to put the fire out. There was no water coming out. The hoses had been cut. Well, hey. All right, let me just go back a second. Okay. So the hoses had been cut, and what happened was somebody had gotten into the back of the engine house and cut the hoses. Now, in this group right here, who shows up but Wash Loomis? Now this is 3 o'clock in the morning in Morrisville. You don't go to Morrisville at 3 o'clock in the morning. Wash Loomis was there. We asked him, well, Wash, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm here on business. And we said, well, Wash, what is your business? And Wash says, none of your business. He was a smart aleck kid, just a smart aleck. Now, you know there were indictments against the Loomises up, they thought, in the courthouse. So they thought, and allegedly, I have to add allegedly, they thought that these indictments, if they got rid of them, well, they wouldn't have to appear in court, they'd be scot-free. So we think they burned the courthouse down. Now, little did they know that the indictments were in the county clerk's office next door. So they burned down the courthouse, really, for no reason. And you know, I put out a reward. There it is. William F. Bonney, Sheriff, $1,000 reward. Now, nobody's ever claimed it. So if you have any information, come and see me and I'll make sure you get that $1,000 reward. So the courthouse burned to the ground, thanks to the hoses being cut, and Madison County built a new courthouse. Courthouse on there. There's where the indictments were. That's the county clerk's office. So out of the ashes rose a new county courthouse. And even on the inside, if you look, there's the main courtroom, judge's bench, doors on either side, the chairs along, the spittoons. Got to have spittoons in the courthouse. And if you look at it today, folks come up to Morrisville, there's the doors on either side. It's changed a little bit. It was in danger of being torn down back in the 50s. The college that was formed there was going to tear it down. Well, it was saved, and it's now a vibrant part of the community. There are weddings and concerts and plays and parties that take place there, and it's a wonderful part of Madison County. Well, the end of the Loomises. What happened? 1864, they burned the courthouse. Now that cost a lot of money to build a new courthouse. Folks in Madison County weren't happy about that. They built it, but they weren't happy. 1865, the Civil War ended. Well, all those soldiers that we had that went off to war, they were coming home. And they were seeing what the Loomises had been up to. Now, none of the Loomises were in the Army and served in the Civil War. And on top of that, they harbored deserters and bounty jumpers and all sorts of criminals. Soldiers didn't take lightly to that. In 1865, Wash Loomis was killed. And it was October 31st, about that a sheriff from over in Oneida County named James Filkins. He and a couple of his friends, his deputies, went over to the Loomis homestead, and they grabbed Wash Loomis, and they grabbed him right out of bed. They took him down to that summer kitchen, and they beat him to death. 1865. Now they say, if you go over to 9 Mile Swamp on Halloween, you may hear the clippity-clop of Wash Loomis's horse riding through the swamp. So Wash was killed, and this is supposedly the gun that was used to pistol whip him to death. It belongs to a gentleman named Roger Mason. The Mason family lived on that road, on Mason Road, and he's descended from the family, and there he is holding that gun, which they keep in a locked box in a locked room. Okay, what's next? Oh, and the murder of Phoebe Crandall, which was in December of 1865. Now, Phoebe was just a beloved figure in Madison County, and Henry was so very well respected. That murder just didn't set well with the people of Madison County. And in 1866, the homestead was burned. Remember I told you that there was nothing, if you go over there, you'd see nothing of the homestead. It's gone, it was burned. A posse of about 150 men went over there with their ropes and kerosene and torches, and they put a torch to the homestead. They put the Loomises, there was Rhoda and Cornelia and one of the boys, they sat out on the edge of the road. They were burned out, and they were told to get out of town and don't come back. Well, they went up to Central Square in Oswego County, and they kind of lived up there. A couple of boys stayed around, but laid low for a long time. And the homestead was gone, but you know, there were some things saved out of that fire. There's a coverlet, and I'm going to show you. This lady right here is Roseanne Loomis Gay, who was a granddaughter of Wheeler, the fellow that was up in Canada. And this coverlet down in the corner says Rhoda Loomis. Now B. French, Bartlett French was the weaver, lived in Waterville, and there's the date, 1834. That coverlet is just priceless. The fellow B. French would go around and on consignment, he would take orders for coverlets. And they would go back to the factory and they would have churning them out, and they would just add that information down in the corner for anybody who was going to buy one. Well, you know, there was something else saved out of that fire, a sampler. Now, samplers were important. The girls made these samplers. They learned, number one, their alphabet and their numbers, and they learned how to sew. So it served a purpose. And this one down here says, Rhoda Millette is my name, and with my needle wrought the same. September 24th, 1811. That's before she ever met George. He was in the War of 1812. This is 1811 before that. And there it is, our Millette. And I guess the thread they used wasn't too color fast. It ran a bit. But anyway, the Loomises, the end of the Loomises finally came. They are buried in the Sangerfield Cemetery. And the problem is, if you go over there, you probably won't find their headstones because they were removed. It seems people wanted to go over there and chip off a piece of their headstone for a souvenir. So the sexton said, well, I'll put a stop to that, and he just removed the headstones, except for one, and that was Wheeler, Theodore W., that Wheeler that lived up in Canada. His headstone, he died in 1911, so not that long ago, well, for some of us. Yeah, so Theodore Wheeler was the last one buried there. And, oh yeah, remember that Sheriff Filkins that beat Wash Loomis to death? Well, he's buried in North Brookfield Cemetery, and he faces west so he can keep an eye on the Loomises. There they are. That's the gang you wanted to know. So there you are. Then I've told you everything I know about them. If you have any questions, I guess I'll entertain questions. Is that all right? Let me ask if I know you are there any Loomis descendants? Okay. Now, do we have to watch our wallets? Ladies, check your jewelry. Gentlemen, check your wallets. That lady, Roseanne Loomis Gay, okay, I'm going to get out of character and just come back to being kind of normal self. That Roseanne Loomis Gay, the granddaughter of Wheeler, she was a very bright young lady as a young adult. She became a teacher, and when we talked to her, she said that she had such a hard time when she was in school. One of the teachers knew that she was a Loomis, and if she would get an A on a paper, the teacher would give her a B because she was a Loomis. So there was, not everybody would admit to being a Loomis at that time. Oh, and I wanted to show you one other thing, and I'm sure you've seen this around. Let me see if I've got it. The armored car. They carry money. Do they know what that means? What are you gonna do about that?
Counterfeit.
Yeah. So are there any questions about the Loomis? I see a hand in the back.
I'm part of the Crandall family.
Oh, Phoebe's, are you related to Henry and Phoebe?
On my grandfather's side. Yep.
Yeah, they were just, and the picture, the portrait of them is in the Madison County history of 1888, something like that. That's how well respected, that they got their picture and a picture of their home in the Madison County history. So they were just, to have her murdered like that, you know, breaking in with a weapon and she's murdered, just didn't set well. Yes,
I
ma'am.
grew up in Norwich. I heard about the Loomis Hayloft. It was a popular place to go dancing. My mother said I was not to step foot. The name. Yeah.
Talking about dancing, where's that muff? Who's got it?
Right there.
Oh, I thought somebody was going to run it up there.
It's a good one though.
Where you're putting that soft.
I think it would show.
Amazing. Any other? Yes, right here.
I would just say
She danced at the Loomis Hayloft. Another dancer at the Loomis Hayloft. And for you.
I was able to go with my older brothers one time.
Only once? Only once. Okay.
I was pretty young.
I never got to that Loomis Hayloft. I tried to check that out. Check that out, definitely. Yeah. Are there any other yes?
Why do you suppose the lady said to her kids, you don't come home without something, or that you're
Well, you know, Rhoda, I think she had this, it was kind of inbred. Her father ran an inn over in Waterville, in the Waterville area. And running this inn, he sometimes neglected to get a license to serve alcohol, you know, little things like that. So once the constable had to come, this is way back, you know, before Rhoda and George met. The constable and a deputy came over to Mr. Millet's, and the deputy happened to be George Washington Loomis Sr. And the constable and the deputy come in, and they're trying to, you know, arrest Mr. Millet. And Rhoda, she took umbrage at these two men coming in and harassing her father. So she took a coal shovel and started swinging it at the constable. And George saw that and he said, "That's the woman I want." He knew, he saw something in her. And by golly, he married her. They had 12 children, 10 of whom lived to adulthood. Their firstborn was a little girl named Harriet, who died at age 2. Their last child was also a little girl that they named Harriet, who also died at age 2. But in between, there were 10 of them. A couple of the girls married and moved off to Utica or New York City, got out of town, basically, got out of town. And the gang that we talked about, they stayed right in this area in Sangerfield and 9 Mile Swamp. So, and, no, yes?
I got some information I can give you. My great-great-grandfather lived in Tyner, New York, which is above Oxford, below Oxford. And there's a farm there, and it's called the Loomis Sharp Farm. Okay, and that's where what they would do is they would steal horses, and they'd put them in this barn, okay, on top of the hill. But the thing is that there was another wall that went right across the barn, okay? And so the stolen horses were in the back part of the barn, and my great-grandfather's horses were in the front. And when the constable or sheriffs or whatever came, you know, they'd stir up the horses, get them going, and they never heard the horses that were in the back, so they could never get them. And then at nighttime, what they would do is they would take them down the hillside to what they called the Shenango Canal, which is no longer there, okay? It was parallel to the Shenango River.
Yeah.
They put them on packet boats, send them to Utica. Okay, from Utica they would go to the Hudson River, okay, on the Erie Canal.
Yeah.
And then down the, down the Hudson River, New York City, and sell them to the army,
Sure.
stolen horses. Okay, and then what they do, since they also had more of the gang down in New York City area, because after a while it was almost like 200 people, were involved in this whole thing. They would steal the horses from the army, okay, bring them back up, and resell them. And it was just a spiral, and they made a lot of money that way.
If they could have put their skills to use, just think what they could have accomplished. But instead, they knew all the tricks,
Yeah.
which had been instilled in them from
Yes.
Rhoda, right from when they
Yeah.
were little kids.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd steal anything. They grabbed the laundry right off that lady's line
Oh,
right
yeah.
there, who's not paying attention to me. I caught ya. They'd steal the laundry right off somebody's line. They,
Yeah.
they didn't care.
I have a
Yes.
question. What about the man who killed Wash? Did he ever?
Filkins. All right, Sheriff Filkins, or Constable Filkins, was put on trial in Utica, and for murder. And one of his lawyers happened to be a fellow named Roscoe Conkling, who later was a high-powered lawyer and later became United States Senator from New York State. And Filkins got off. They claimed self-defense. I don't know, when you grab somebody out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and beat them to death, I don't know how you can claim self-defense, but it seemed to work. And I'm sure there might have been some money greasing the palm of a lawyer or judge, but he was acquitted of that. Yeah, the Loomises and Filkins had an ongoing battle throughout the years. So, any other questions? Okay, well, now remember, thank you. Wallets, check your jewelry. I'm sure you've got everything. But thank you all very much, and all have a safe trip home.
Thank you.